sound was rising in America. In Harlem, New York, poetry, music, and art began challenging the limits placed on Black identity. This cultural revolution didn't just appear overnight. Harlem's explosion of creativity was born from struggle, migration, and a hunger for self-expression. To understand how the Renaissance began, we have to look at what first brought thousands of Black Americans to what had once been a predominantly upper-class, white residential area. After emancipation, Southern states passed strict laws known as Jim Crow laws, denying African Americans equal treatment under the law. Segregation was enforced in public spaces, voting rights were stripped away, and racial violence was widespread. Life in the South was dangerous and very limiting. As a result, between 1910 and 1970, approximately 6 million African Americans left the South in a mass movement known as the Great Migration, relocating to the North, Midwest, and West. Over time, northern cities developed large Black populations, with New York City becoming one of the most significant destinations. Harlem, in particular, emerged as a major center for Black life, and its African American population surged, creating a rich cultural community. The Harlem section of Manhattan, which covers only 3 square miles, became home to nearly 175,000 African Americans, giving it the largest concentration of Black residents in the world at the time. Harlem became a melting pot where laborers, professionals, and artists lived side by side, creating an environment for collaboration and self-expression. During the Harlem Renaissance, artists and intellectuals experimented boldly, drawing inspiration from lived experience and challenging harmful racial stereotypes. Philosopher Alain Locke described this period as a spiritual coming of age, in which African Americans transformed disillusionment into racial pride. In The New Negro, Locke argued that Black Americans were shedding outdated images imposed by white society and embracing self-respect and confidence. Before the Harlem Renaissance, African American writing was highly restricted, largely depending on white patronage. This dynamic changed during the Harlem Renaissance. Writers such as Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Zora Neale Hurston, and Jessie Redmond Fawcett produced literature that explored the diversity of Black life with independence and pride.
Besides, they'll see how beautiful we are and be ashamed. I, too, am America.
As African Americans migrated north, they brought musical traditions such as blues, spirituals, and ragtime, which laid the foundation for jazz, an improvisational style born from the Black experience. Jazz reflected both struggle and joy, and its rise coincided with the Harlem Renaissance, fueling a powerful wave of expression. Jazz moved from neighborhood gatherings to nightclub stages, transforming Harlem nightlife into a national spectacle and elevating venues like the Cotton Club to national fame. The Cotton Club helped launch the careers of Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Louis Armstrong, and Billie Holiday, and these artists made extraordinary contributions to jazz. For example, Louis Armstrong revolutionized jazz through his trumpet and popularized scat singing. Billie Holiday became the first African American woman to perform with an all-white band, and her song Strange Fruit is widely considered one of the earliest protest songs of the civil rights movement. The Harlem Renaissance emerged at a moment when white America became intensely fascinated with Black culture. As jazz, blues, and Black literature gained popularity beyond Harlem, white audiences increasingly consumed Black artistic expression as both entertainment and spectacle. This phenomenon became known as the Negro Vogue, in which Black art was celebrated yet often stripped of its social and historical meaning. Harlem became a site of cultural tourism. White patrons traveled uptown to experience what they perceived as exotic Black nightlife. Venues such as the Cotton Club were deeply segregated, despite having Black artists performing on stage. The Cotton Club relied on Black talent, but catered almost exclusively to white customers, revealing how Black creativity was commodified for white consumption. Black art was able to achieve unprecedented visibility and commercial success, yet it was often filtered through racist frameworks that reinforced existing hierarchies. White critics frequently described Black culture as primitive or exotic, language that suggested inferiority. Such depictions framed Black artists as sources of raw inspiration rather than intellectual equals, allowing white audiences to enjoy Black culture without actually confronting systemic racism. Reaction also came from within the Black community. The Harlem Renaissance provoked intense debate over the purpose and responsibility of Black art. W.E.B. Du Bois argued that art should serve political ends. In Criteria of Negro Art, he insisted that Black artists had a moral obligation to combat racist narratives and advance racial uplift. However, in The Negro Artist and The Racial Mountain, Langston Hughes criticized the pursuit of white approval and argued that artistic freedom itself was revolutionary. However, while artists were able to gain recognition, the broader social context remained violently hostile. The 1920s saw the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan and widespread racial terror. Cultural achievements simply did not bring immediate justice. As a result, the Harlem Renaissance functioned as both a cultural revolution and a reminder of structural racism. An essential yet often overlooked dimension of the Harlem Renaissance was its significant Black queer presence. Queer artists shaped the movement's aesthetics, particularly through blues music, performance, and nightlife. Harlem offered rare spaces where gender and sexual norms could be challenged through art. Blues singer Ma Rainey openly defied convention. In her 1928 song Prove It On Me Blues, she referenced same-sex desire with remarkable boldness. Through coded language and performance, Rainey and other women carved out spaces of expression. Yet, this visibility remained fragile. While some women performers enjoyed limited freedom, Black queer men faced heightened surveillance, criminalization, and violence. Public queerness led to harassment, forcing men to seek safety in underground communities. These networks later evolved into ballroom cultures, where identity and belonging could be affirmed. During the Harlem Renaissance, queer artists were able to expand the boundaries of expression, yet they did so within a society that refused to fully recognize their humanity. By the late 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance began to lose momentum because the economic foundation supporting it collapsed. The stock market crash of 1929 and the onset of the Great Depression devastated Black communities. Black-owned businesses closed, publishing opportunities disappeared, and patrons who had once funded artists withdrew their support. For many writers, musicians, and visual artists, creative work became increasingly difficult to sustain in a society where Black Americans were often the first to lose employment and the last to receive aid. Yet even as the movement waned, its ideas still endured. The movement's emphasis on racial pride, cultural autonomy, and collective identity influenced later developments, reshaping how African Americans saw themselves and how Black culture was perceived in American society. This cultural shift encouraged greater political awareness and activism, strengthening organizations such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and inspiring future generations to challenge segregation and discrimination through organized protest and legal action. The ideas of dignity, equality, and racial pride that emerged in Harlem later helped fuel the civil rights movement's demands for desegregation, voting rights, and equal protection under the law. On a greater scale, the movement's celebration of African heritage and Black identity also influenced global Black intellectual traditions such as negritude, as writers in Africa and the Caribbean drew inspiration from Harlem's literature and philosophy to assert their own cultural identity. For the first time on a national and international scale, Black artists asserted themselves as authoritative interpreters of Black life. Literature, music, and visual art highlighted pride in their identity. The movement expanded the boundaries of Western high culture. Jazz entered concert halls. Black literature reached mainstream publishers, and African American intellectuals engaged in global conversations about race, colonialism, and identity. The Harlem Renaissance lit a cultural flame that still warms the soul of America